And then the rest had serious, serious injuries. And so, you look at this TV show, the Pit, which is a pretty good show. And in that mass casualty, they saw 112. We saw between 4 and 450 people that day. So 4 times that number.
That is amazing. What time did your day start? Are you like 6 AM
Yeah.
to
Yeah. Well,
what's the
it's really
shifts?
funny because the work is so uh, absurd
Yeah.
that there really was no schedule for the international doctors. So when we got there, uh, I was with another U.S. emergency physician from Houston, and we thought to ourselves, we're going to work 10, 12-hour days, take a break and come back. And the other emergency physicians from Gaza were like, well, I think you should try 4 hours. Just do 4 hours. We're like,
4.
4 hours.
Yeah.
And, after 4 hours, I found myself staggering away, literally just staggering away from the emergency department, just going, like, holy moly, what is going on here? And so yeah, I mean, like, I was there for,
And that's because it's just patient after
yeah,
patient after
yeah.
patient after patient. And by the way, are these wounds predominantly like gunshot wounds? Like, are people getting I honestly, from what I see, they're
Yeah.
almost getting snipered off,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's not like random gunshot wounds like in the abdomen or in the leg. It seems like sniper gunshot wounds to where they're being picked off like this, right?
Absolutely. So there's been an evolution in the injury patterns. So early on in the genocide, when there were still a lot of structures, when these structures were being demolished with bombs, people were getting a lot of crush injuries. So there are a lot of people who are just, crushed.
Crushed.
And there's like a whole sort of different pathophysiology of crush injuries and how to take care of them, what to predict, etc. But then, there are no superstructures anymore. They're just exposed people. And, so if they're hit by tanks, which we saw, which would happen some days, these tank shells would just rip through everything. So you have combined head, neck, chest, abdomen, limbs, just completely shredded like they were thrown through, a meat shredder. And those patients are so challenging to take care of. I mean, they're the lethality of those, even if they seem initially relatively stable, the chance for infection and
Yeah.
long-term disability and everything is so high. But when most of the time that I was there, so I got there June 12th, which was very shortly after the GHF started their so-called food distributions.
Yeah.
And that's when we started to really see these predictable sniper types of attacks. And I'm not a weapons expert, and I'm not an expert in sort of war injury. And now those experts are coming out and they're looking at the data and they're saying, absolutely, this was intentional sniper. And even IDF soldiers and other people responsible for this have started to leak information that that's precisely what they were doing. So one day we would see all head injuries. So in the front of the head, the side of the head, a large caliber projectile wreaking just catastrophic injury to the brain and the skull. Some people were probably lucky enough to survive, but probably with great disability. Many were dead upon arrival. But then the next day we would see neck wounds. And so we'd see all these crazy neck wounds where it would often either make them quadriplegic, paralyzed for the rest of their life, maybe even to the point where they stop breathing on their own. Other times they just wreck the trachea. So air would escape underneath the tissue. We call it crepitance. And so you have like all these, it's like Rice Krispies in the chest and neck. And those patients needed to be intubated and needed to have a breathing tube down their lungs for a long period of time before they can get a repair. And those patients are also really at high risk because long-term intubation under these circumstances puts them at really high risk for what we call ventilator assisted pneumonia and, fungal infections and
Yeah.
complex infections. And then the next day, then we'd see all chest injuries. And then we would see all groin injuries. And the groin injuries are like among the worst. You think the groin, well, you've got major blood vessels that are
Yeah,
there that are very difficult to compress, to put direct pressure on to, stave the bleeding. And also they often will come with rectal and gut injuries. So not only do you have all this vascular trauma, but you got feces,
yeah,
mixed in among it all, and it's just so devastating to look at a 10-year-old boy who has this, and he's awake and thinking and talking, and you're looking at him in the face, and you're just, trying to not sort of convey by the way that you look, to
yeah,
them that
yeah,
your life is over, kid, and it's devastating, and it's funny because a lot of people say that it's hard to put words to describe what's going on. And it's really not that hard to put words to it. It's just that the words are so foul and
yeah,
grotesque
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
abnormal and, gut wrenching that it's hard to put words to it, but
No, I
yeah,
get it, man. I get it.
yeah,
It's hard to even visualize. Like again, I mean, I'm trying to visualize everything as you're talking about it, and I really want the audience to visualize just how insane what you're saying you saw day after day after day, hour after hour after hour. I mean, have you ever seen anything like this in your career in the United States? Like even one
no.
time?
No, I mean, occasionally when I've worked at major trauma centers, I've seen, 5 or 6 major trauma patients all at the same time, explosions, large multi-vehicle car accidents, but nothing like this, and in March of 2020, when COVID was really hitting
Yeah.
Manhattan, I was lucky enough to get some time off, and I went to New York Presbyterian at the height of the COVID crisis in New York.
Wow.
And yeah, worked for a month. Um, and, I saw that was unnatural. I mean, there were days where, 100 people died.
Okay. Wow.
And so that was, I think that was the closest to this. But, and I've worked in Mexico, and I've seen, pickup trucks go off of bridges with 15 people in the bed of the pickup truck, all landing, in boulders.
Yeah.
And, but that didn't compare. That's 1 hour
Yeah. Yeah.
in Gaza and
Yeah.
Nasser,
Yeah.
you know? And so I don't think anybody has, and I've even talked to some of my colleagues that have had a lot of experience in Afghanistan and Iraq. And, what they described to me was just wholly different, radically different
Wow.
than what we
Interesting.
experienced.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
And by the way, I should have started the interview with this. You're an emergency physician. You're not a surgeon, though, are you?
Correct. I'm not. I'm a board certified emergency
Okay,
physician.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. And so, I have to imagine how many people that are coming in, I guess, just require physician services, and then how many people actually need surgery?
Yeah. Well, the Nasser Emergency Department was pretty large, but I really pretty much just stayed in the trauma
Okay,
resuscitation room,
okay, okay, okay.
predominantly because, that's where the sickest and most injured people were. But that's also the only place where everybody spoke English. So all the
Got it.
nurses, all the physicians, a fair amount of the patients and the family. But outside of that, in the regular emergency department where there were lesser injuries, language was just a huge issue. And,
Yeah, yeah,
I would have, interpreters with me sometimes, but they would like wander off. And then, a whole family would grab me and just drag me over to their patient's room thinking, oh, this foreign doctor is going to save Hamad, you know, and, um, and I would just be standing there and I was like, pantomiming, and things
yeah.
like that. Yeah. So I pretty much stayed in the resuscitation room. And most of those patients, I mean, I'd say at least 75% of the patients that I saw eventually went for surgery in some way, shape, or form. The rest of them would probably go to the ICU,
Got it,
who
got
are
it.
fairly stable once we like put in chest tubes or drains around their heart and that kind of thing. But, occasionally it was interesting. Occasionally we would all of a sudden a complex medical patient would show up out of nowhere. Like somebody's uncle would have a congestive heart failure exacerbation. So right in the middle of the trauma room would be an old guy, really short of breath, with really high blood
Like
pressure.
a
Yeah.
regular medical
Yeah.
situation.
Like
Oh,
a regular
you know
medical
what?
situation.
That is so
Yeah. Yeah.
funny. I
Yeah.
don't think anybody even thinks that while all this insanity is going on, there's still regular medical situations that are also happening.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
absolutely. And the funny part is that this is a Nasser has an emergency medicine residency training program. So there are interns, medical students, residents, and attending physicians who are in charge. But the place
Wow.
is so overwhelmed that everyone's kind of acting independently.
Yeah,
They'd only predominantly only seen trauma for the last, 22 months. So these medically complex and unstable patients would come in and they would kind of stand there and just stare at them and go, and that was one of the areas where, the US physicians were able to help a little bit. We like jumped in and, we started giving them nitrates to lower their blood pressure, putting them on positive pressure ventilation, hitting them with Lasix so they would pee out the fluid overload. And we would give bedside sort of tutorials and things like that. And this is stuff that they knew intellectually,
yeah,
but
yeah,
it
yeah,
just kind of shocked them when it showed up, under the
yeah, yeah.
circumstances. But
I could
yeah, and I
imagine.
think that's one of the untold stories of Palestine, of Gaza, and especially from a medical standpoint, is that there's an epistemide, where there's like the death of medical education. The medical schools are gone.
They're
The
gone.
rubble. All of the documents are gone. Some people don't have any sort of documentation of their 6 years of medical education. And these are highly trained people. And Palestine has one of the highest literacy rates in the world, like 97, 98%. So these, you know, Palestinians take great pride in their intellect and
Education, yeah,
education. And that's just been destroyed. And what that does is it's just another deep level of trauma to the Palestinian people because, they're going to lose their healthcare providers,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
and the infrastructure's gone and it could take decades to kind of
Oh,
rebuild
yeah, absolutely,
and
absolutely.
so
Where did you sleep?
yeah, so all academic hospitals usually have dormitories for medical
Okay,
students and residents to
okay,
spend the night while they're working. And so most of the medical students and residents would walk home to their tents. And so the international visiting doctors would stay in those facilities. And they were quite nice. And actually the sleeping room had air conditioning, which is one of the only places in the hospital. And it was like, it was 100 degrees in the trauma resuscitation bay.
that's
So
insane.
occasionally I would just, I would run up there and just lay in the air conditioning for a little bit. But, while we were there, one of the things that happened is we took a tour of the children's hospital, which was just adjacent to Nasser. And we took a tour there, just taking a break. And we realized, Dr. Fa, the head of the hospital was like, yeah, we have 48 hours of formula left. And this is specialized formula. So these are not just starving, malnourished infants. They
Yeah,
require a specialized formula, no substitute. If you try to substitute, they will die and they had 48 hours left and they would get this little trickle of, one or two cans in every couple of days. And so within 30 minutes of being on this tour, I got the domain name Gaza Formula Countdown 2025 and built a
yeah,
website in literally in 45 minutes. And we are like, okay, we need to like raise, awareness of this and, do something about it, and, we tried everything. I mean, we tried to contact the Pope, tried to contact China for airdrop. We tried to work every angle. And, we were not successful. It was an amateurish campaign. It was a, shoot from the hip campaign. We didn't, we're just like four US doctors. We don't know what we're doing. We just knew that we needed to do something.
yeah, yeah. Your US doctors turning into web designers, turning
Yeah.
into PR agencies, turning
Yeah.
into dude, it is insane. Alright, let me ask you this question, and I asked Tara Ahmad this, and I asked, Dr. Mimi Syed the same question. So you're there, you're working on all these people. Did you ever see Hamas militants or any militants, and did you ever treat any militants?
Not that I know of. Like I say, I saw broken people. I
Yeah,
saw skeletal people. I saw, old men with empty pockets and broken sandals. I never saw a weapon, not one, not a knife, anything. I mean, late at night talking to, Palestinians, I asked them, I like, so, do you have, family and friends in Hamas? And they would openly tell me, like, oh, yeah, I mean, my Uncle Harry, my next door neighbor, but, these really weren't true, militants.
They're not militants.
They
Yeah.
worked at a bakery, but
Yeah. Yeah.
they worked at a bakery, but they're pissed off.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
have had it with, 75 years of occupation. And, I do not condone civilian violence in any way, shape, or form. Uh, but, you know, I would not paint these brothers and cousins as, who may have had some affiliation with Hamas over the last decades as, being, radical
Like
terrorists.
radical militant people. And again, what I'm trying to understand, and again, I'm trying to visualize everything. It's like, are there guys walking around with machine guns? Are there guys
Yeah.
walking around? Because
Yeah.
what you see in the press,
Yeah.
especially when it's related to like, the disbursement of food, all of a sudden you see Hamas everywhere, and supposedly they're like stealing food, they're doing this. But then at the end of the day, if they're in a war, you would expect some casualties. So where the
Yeah.
hell are they being treated? Where the hell
Yeah.
are they? They're
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
they're not patrolling anything. There's so
Yeah.
much shadiness to
Yeah. Yeah.
all of that, man.
Want the full truth? Watch the full Deep Shallow Dive interview next. And hit subscribe if you're done with narratives and ready to call a spade a spade.